So we're going to learn how to make these neurographic works of art. Here's a couple of examples. So let's go ahead and get started. The first step is very easy. You draw 3 lines from one edge of the paper, wiggle around to the other edge of the paper. So just 3 lines and then 3 shapes that cross over those lines. So you want the lines to cross over each other and have lots of places where lines intersect other lines, where they cross each other. That should take about half a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and give you about a minute to do that. I'm going to pause the video here. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to find all of the points of intersection, all the places where one line crosses another line, and you're going to circle it. This will help you find where those places are and will also help you round out those cross sections, those crosswalks, those intersections, whatever word you want to use for that. Now, have your neighbor check to make sure you found them all. Double check to make sure you found all the intersections. So I'm going to refer to these as intersections. Now, here is what you do not want to do. I'm just going to show you an example because we're going to trace these lines, but you don't want to have these really hard T's or X's. Instead, you want to have more of U's where those intersections are. So if we look at these X's and T's that I've created, right, here's a T. What I want to do is I want to round that off, and then when I'm tracing, I'm going to create more of a U shape around that intersection and smooth that out so it looks more natural. The end product will look more like a butterfly wings or neurons or ink blots. It will look very organic or natural just by rounding out those intersecting points. So here this looks like an X, so I'm going to do a nice round, nice big circle around that. But then when I see that U is actually going to be pretty small. So I'm just going to create a really thick line around it by going around my circle and fill that whole thing in. I don't want it to look just like a dot on my intersection. I want it to look like the neuron, where it's just connected a lot, or maybe where rivers come and meet to create a lake. So very natural shape is what I'm looking for. All right, so I'm going to do that here on my my main piece of paper, just to show you sort of the good example there, the process up close. So I'm just going around, tracing each of these lines and going around the circles, the outside of the circles. Tracing the line and going around the outside of the circle so that it creates more of like a river flow or more like the on-ramps of a highway, and ends up looking more like the outlines of butterfly wings, is another way to think about it. Just very natural and organic. All right, I'm going to speed up just a little bit here while I trace the rest of these. All right, I'm still in fast forward mode, but I want you to zoom in here and see how I treat these circles, going around those circles to create rounded edges and then filling in those points of connection. Just filling it in nicely. And remember that even though I'm going in super duper fast forward mode right now, you should take your time, and this should be a calm, quiet, meditative process. So like right here, another way to think about it is you can make these U's around an intersection and then follow those hues. So here, or sometimes I like to think about them as off-ramps. Or you can circle the inside of the space that you created. Now what you don't want to do is just color in the dot and connect it like that. Round that off, thicken that up, make those lines nice and fat or make them thin. But those points of connections should just be rounded off and flow naturally into the longer line. So it shouldn't just look like dots connected with a line, but more of where the ink has pooled from a flow of ink. And then just color in those dots,
I've already painted
and that is the first step
here because I want you to see how it looks when the paint dries. How it looks very flowy and cloud-like, and this is achieved by doing a wet-on-wet technique, which we've probably done in previous projects, but I want to review that if you don't know it yet already, or teach you if this is new information. So I'm going to find a new space, and you can turn your paper around. I'm going to be working in this space right here. So we're going to be using watercolor paints, and you're going to get a brush. It's going to be the blue brush. It has clean water. And the green brush from my Crayola set of brushes. This is your paint water, okay? So we're going to keep, the blue brush is going to stay clean, and then we're going to use the green brush to do the painting. Now, when we get watercolors, when we first get them, they probably are going to be all dry. And watercolors don't work until we activate them with water, which is why they're called watercolors. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get our clean water, and we're just going to put a drop or two of water into those paints to get them activated, to wake them up. And it only takes a few seconds, but it does take a few seconds to wake those paints up. Then we're going to put water, clean water down, and that will allow our paints to flow freely on the water and through the water and mix together to create our tertiary colors. So for this project, we are going to be using analogous colors. So analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So for example, blue, the big circle, is next to the other blue circle, violet, and when they mix together, they make blue-violet. Blue is a primary color. It's connected with this solid line. Violet is a secondary color. When you mix red and blue together, you make violet. It's a secondary color. But when you take this secondary color and mix it with this primary color, you get a tertiary color. Tertiary, that sounds like T. T like third color, tertiary. And all of these together create an analogous color group. Analogous. Analogous kind of sounds like allegory or analogy, which is like a story that means a different, that illustrates your point, right? It's a story that's like the thing you're talking about. These are colors that are like each other. These are analogous colors. They are colors that are next to each other. So we have three colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, but we do not have any we don't have any tertiary colors in our paint palette. However, I have arranged that your paint palette are in color wheel order. So violet and blue, right? Violet and blue are next to each other, and then blue and green, and then green and yellow, and then yellow and orange and red, and then red circles back around to violet. Okay? So when you pick your colors, you're going to pick out two colors that are next to each other. Any two colors that are next to each other. Those count as next to each other because it would circle around if these were in a circle. When those two colors mix together, they'll make a tertiary color, because as we can see, this is also in a pattern of primary, secondary, primary, secondary, primary, secondary. So when you mix a primary and a secondary together that are next to each other, they will make a tertiary color. Now it's also going to make these tertiary colors in a very beautiful and zenful way, and you will have a lovely aesthetic experience, which means it's when you have something that is visually cool and you go, oh, cool. So put the water on, clean water, pick out your two colors. I think this time I'm going to do blue and green. Just get a dot of color. And it just spreads on like that. And then you get a dot of the next color. And it will also just spread together. You can mix a little bit to make that blue-green. You can leave some of it so that it's separate. And it will just flow together. Let's zoom in on another example here. Let's zoom in right here so you guys can really get that aesthetic experience of those colors mixing together. Get your paper wet in just that area that you want to have colored in with your two analogous colors. Pick out the two analogous colors you're going to use. I'm going to use orange and red this time. Mix together with the red to make that red orange. Let's do this area because it's not touching that area, so I'm going to skip a space so they don't accidentally mix together. So I always kind of want to skip this space that I just did so that it gives this space a chance to dry. Alright, I am going to do blue and violet. This is one of my favorites. Just little lines and dots of color there, and it lets it spread around like that. And that's what you're going to do for about half the spaces. You don't have to do every single space. You may do every single space if you want to, but you have to do at least half of the spaces. So I have a few more that I'm going to do to fill up half of the white paper with colors, and I will continue to do that in fast forward mode.